Welcome to the Forgotten Narrator. There is no name for it in Low Gothic. No one ever wrote a manual, no one returned from it sane, and no one who knew the details would ever speak them aloud. What happens inside an orc torture pit prison is not war. It is not interrogation. It is not survival. It is something far more brutal and alien. A waking nightmare crafted not by malice alone, but by the joyous, instinctual violence of a species that finds meaning in your suffering. There are worse ways to die in the galaxy, but few crueler ways to keep living. Imagine it. Iron grots dragging you by chains through rust-slick corridors, their laughter high-pitched and maddening. Orcs bellowing for blood, not because they need information or vengeance, but because it makes them feel alive. There are no rules, no mercy, no end, just endless cycles of pain, humiliation, confusion, and despair. You are not a prisoner to be ransomed or redeemed. You are a plaything in a culture that sees torture as sport, survival as weakness, and your screams as music. This is not a question of survival. It's a question of identity, of soul, of whether a human can remain human when all humanity is stripped from them. To understand the possibility or impossibility of surviving an orc torture pit, we must first grasp what such a place even is. There's no standardized blueprint. No two orc warbands are the same, and no orc construct follows any logic known to the Mechanicus. But what threads all their prisons together is a terrifying consistency of purpose, chaos, cruelty, and an overwhelming sense of wrongness. They are less prisons in the imperial sense, and more arenas, meat grinders, laboratories of pain, and theaters of grotesque humor, all smashed together into one festering hole in reality. Picture a pit carved into the heart of a war fortress, made not with care, but with glee. Crude scaffolding and jagged metal jut from the walls, often electrified or soaked in caustic fungal sludge. The air is thick with oil fumes, rotting meat, and the pungent stink of orc spores. Light flickers sporadically, either from looted lumen strips haphazardly nailed to walls, or from bioluminescent squigs strung up like mocking chandeliers. The floor is never flat. It writhes with muck, shifting grates, broken bone, and unstable debris. No space is safe. No corner is clean. The orcs build these places less as containment and more as entertainment. They don't care if you escape, because where would you go? Even if you made it past the first gate, the fortress is alive with war beasts, sentry guns, or roaming mobs spoiling for a fight. But escape is rarely on the table. Most who enter these pits are broken long before they dream of fleeing. The construction reflects this intent. Cells are more like cages, open-faced, built to show off their contents. They may be suspended from ceilings, submerged in grime, or even partially integrated into the walls, as if the prisoners were nothing more than decorations for the orcs' amusement. The architecture is infused with the orc's psyche, a kind of organic brutality. Torture machines often resemble oversized weapons or malformed vehicles, buzzsaw beds, teeth-gnashing chairs, or motivator boots that crush your shins when you try to run. Everything is oversized, oily, and dangerously alive. The prisons pulse with sound, not just the screams of the damned, but the roars of laughing orcs, the growls of beasts, the clanging of metal, and the hissing of unstable power sources. There is no silence. There is no respite. And it's not only physical architecture that defines the pit, but its rules, or the lack thereof. Sometimes the prisoners are forced to fight each other for scraps or survival. Sometimes they are dragged out to test the latest contraption made by a mad mech. Other times, they are simply left to rot while orcs take bets on how long it takes for them to die or go mad. These activities aren't scheduled. They happen at random as the whims of the orcs shift like the moods of a storm god. This unpredictability is a form of torment all its own. The mind cannot settle. The body never truly rests. The most terrifying thing about these pits is that they are alive in a sense, not in the warp-spawned demonic way, but in the way fungus spreads. The walls rot and regrow, sometimes sprouting strange nodules or orc spores. Grots scurry through vents and gaps like diseased rats, often doubling as maintenance workers and sadistic torturers in their own right. The pits may even shift configuration without warning, as orcs rip out walls or weld new chambers on during drunken improvements. A prisoner may wake up to find their cell no longer exists, replaced by a pit fight arena filled with ravenous squigs. And while the Imperium has dark places of its own, Black ships, inquisitorial cells, penal colonies, nothing quite matches the intentional irrationality of orc design. Human cruelty is methodical, purposeful. Orc cruelty is instinctive, celebratory. They don't torment because they hate you. They do it because it's fun, and because their entire ecosystem is built on joy through violence. That lack of malice, the absence of personal hatred, makes their actions all the more terrifying. To them, your screams are background noise to their celebration. For a human thrown into this world, there is no common ground, no negotiation, no comprehension. The very walls mock your sanity. Every sensation is heightened, not just pain, but confusion, disorientation, and the relentless psychological assault of being in a space that obeys no law but orc logic. Time itself feels broken. There's no night or day, only cycles of torment and blackouts, laughter and silence, meat and metal. And somewhere in the heart of it all, towering over the din, is the grotesque shape of a knob or war boss, watching his toys with pride. These torture pits are not dungeons. They are engines of madness. They are ecosystems built on the suffering of lesser beings. To survive them is not merely to avoid death. It is to find meaning in madness, to carve a place for yourself in a nightmare, and to avoid becoming a part of it. But more on that pain soon. It's tempting to think orcs have no need for prisoners. After all, they are creatures of endless war, born to fight, genetically compelled to destroy. So why would they ever keep anyone alive, much less imprison them? The answer lies in the twisted cultural tapestry of the orc species, a blend of savagery, ritual, crude practicality, and a grotesque love of spectacle. When orcs keep prisoners, it is never for mercy. It is for purpose. And that purpose is almost always vile. At the most basic level, prisoners provide entertainment. Orcs aren't just warriors, they are revelers in violence. A captive human is a toy, a source of amusement. One moment, they're being poked with sharpened sticks by a crowd of giggling grots. The next, they're being shoved into an arena with a malfunctioning Killican just to see who gets shredded first, the human or the war machine. The randomness is the point. Orcs are creatures of the moment. A captive is a distraction from boredom, and boredom is the one thing orcs despise more than peace. Then there's the matter of testing. Orcs, despite their crude appearances, are constantly building mechs, weapons, war gear, torture devices. But they don't use schematics. They test by trial and error. And what better test subject than something that screams when injured? Pain boys might strap a prisoner into a chair made of spinning saws and duct tape, not to learn anatomy, but just to see what happens. Mechs might weld a human into the cockpit of a half-finished walker just to see if the thing moves. To orcs, this is not cruelty, it's curiosity. The same way a child pulls the legs off a spider, not out of hate, but fascination. There's also a sense of warped tradition. Some orc warbands, especially those that fancy themselves cultured or led by freebooters, maintain rituals around prisoners. These might be crude mock trials, forced performances, or sacrificial games where prisoners are hunted for sport. To the orcs, this adds variety to the warband's rhythm. Not all fights can be big battles. Sometimes you need a little entertainment between invasions. These traditions aren't ancient. They mutate constantly, but they are passed on, mimicked, and celebrated. One warboss's habit of feeding prisoners to a cyborg squig might become the next warband's cherished initiation rite. And then there's the role of utility. As much as orcs love fighting, they are not entirely wasteful. Sometimes prisoners are pressed into service, hauling scrap, stoking engines, digging trenches. They are treated worse than slaves, because even a slave in orc society might be expected to last more than a few days. Human prisoners are burned through like fuel. But even this is valuable in orc logic. A prisoner who lasts longer than expected might be rewarded with less beatings or a moment of rest, not out of kindness, but because orcs love stories. A tough prisoner becomes a tale to tell. Remember Dahumi dat bit off Snaga's ear? We used him to test the Burnaz. In rare cases, the orcs may even keep prisoners as mascots. These aren't prisoners in the conventional sense, but semi-tame freaks paraded for laughs. A broken psyker who glows in the dark, a tech priest who screams machine rights while being kicked around, a guardsman who thinks he's an orc and is too far gone to remember his own name. These are not survivors. They are punchlines. And their existence speaks to the most horrifying truth of all, that the orcs, are not mindless. They are creative, they are imaginative, and they enjoy watching what happens when something fragile is placed in their chaotic world. Of course, not all orcs treat prisoners the same. Some warbands, like the Blood Axes, might keep prisoners for more tactical reasons, perhaps to extract crude intelligence or use them in barter. Others, like the Goths, might not even bother with cages, preferring immediate execution or arena combat. But across all clans, the underlying impulse remains. Prisoners are tools of joy, pain, and purpose. They exist to enhance the orc experience of war. And whether they last a minute or a month, they feed the whack in ways no orc technology ever could. So when a human falls into an orc torture pit, they are not forgotten. They are not lost in the cracks of a careless empire. They become a part of the endless theater of war. Their suffering has meaning, but only to the orcs. And that meaning is monstrous, primal, and laugh-out-loud cruel. To survive here, one must not merely resist death, one must become interesting. And in a galaxy this dark, sometimes the worst fate isn't being killed. It's being noticed. There is no schedule, no routine, no safety net for those trapped in the orc torture pits. Life is measured in heartbeats, in gasps, in the random mercy of the creatures that surround you. Some prisoners may endure days of torment before a squig's jaws tear them apart. Others might linger for months, dragged from one grotesque trial to another. But every single day is defined by violence, hunger, and the relentless pressure of survival. Food is rarely more than scraps or partially rotted meat. Water is scarce or contaminated, and sleep is often impossible, broken by the constant din of orc revelry. The environment itself becomes a weapon, a cruel accomplice in their suffering. The prisoner's routine, if it can be called that, is dictated entirely by orc whims. You might be dragged from one cell to another, thrown into a pit to fight a den of squigs, or tied to a mechanical contraption meant to test your tolerance for pain. One moment, the floor beneath you might collapse into a pit of spikes. The next, you could be forced to haul barrels of molten metal through narrow, slick tunnels. The humans are not seen as beings with rights or dignity. They are objects of use and amusement. The orcs themselves are unpredictable. Sometimes a nob will watch silently. Other times, a mob will invent new punishments on the spot, cheering and laughing with a sadistic glee that is nearly impossible for a human mind to comprehend. In addition to the physical hardships, the prisoners face a constant psychological assault. Orcs are loud, chaotic, and deliberately cruel in ways that undermine sanity. Screams echo through corridors, punctuated by guttural laughter and the shrieks of grots. The lights are irregular, flickering, or blinding, creating a disorienting, hallucinatory environment. Even when not actively tortured, a human is subjected to an atmosphere designed to break down perception, to make them question what is real. Time loses all meaning. Days, weeks, or months merge into a blur of pain and terror, making endurance as much a battle of mind as of body. Orc torture is rarely surgical or methodical in a human sense. It is improvisational and chaotic, yet terrifyingly effective. A pain boy might rip a limb open, not for science, but to see what happens when it heals under orcish treatments. A human might be strapped to a rotating drum lined with spikes, meant not to kill, but to induce sheer, relentless terror. Exposure to the elements within the pit, heat, cold, chemical toxins, is also a common form of torment. Often, prisoners are deliberately left to crawl through muck or stand in fetid water for hours or days until exhaustion, infection, or disease takes hold. Everything is designed to stretch life to the limits of misery, ensuring that survival is not just improbable, but nearly impossible. For the human mind, survival is not merely a physical struggle, but a constant negotiation with fear. Loneliness can be as dangerous as starvation. In these pits, even brief moments of hope can be weaponized by the orcs themselves. A prisoner might be given a scrap of food, only to have it snatched away in a grotesque joke. Or they might see a glimpse of escape, only to find themselves thrust into a more horrifying ordeal. The mind becomes an arena, as much as the pit itself, with paranoia, hallucination, and despair as constant companions. Maintaining any sense of self, of identity, is a victory in itself. The human body is pushed to extremes. Malnutrition, infection, wounds, and exhaustion compound each other, creating a slow spiral toward death. Every movement carries risk. Every step might trigger a trap, an ambush, or a spontaneous attack from orc beasts or mech creations. The prisoners' immune systems weaken, their muscles atrophy or are torn by forced labor, their nerves fray under continual pain. Even if one could avoid active violence, the environment alone is lethal over time. Surviving in a pit is not about strength, it is about luck, cunning, and the ability to endure an unending barrage of horrors. Yet some humans cling to life. There are whispered tales, the faintest rumors among prisoners, of those who have endured for weeks or months. These survivors are often broken, hollow shells of their former selves, with minds scarred by what they have witnessed. They are not heroes in the traditional sense, they are living testaments to the limits of human endurance. They may form fragile alliances with grots, exploit the occasional lapse in orc attention, or hide within structural nooks when possible. Survival is less about confrontation and more about invisibility, patience, and cunning. Even acts of resistance can be double-edged. Orcs respect strength, but they also punish hubris brutally. A human who fights back successfully may earn a temporary reprieve, but is often thrust into even more dangerous situations afterward. Escape attempts frequently result in death, not just for the escapee, but for any others nearby. Survival demands constant calculation: when to hide, when to submit, when to risk action. Every decision is a balance between immediate safety and the long game of endurance. Ultimately, life in an orc torture pit is a relentless test of body, mind, and soul. The physical pain is crushing, the psychological strain relentless, and the environment a constant threat. Few humans, if any, survive unscathed. Even those who endure may lose everything that made them human: their identity, their hope, and their sanity. In such a place, survival is not a triumph in the traditional sense. It is a grim testament to endurance, adaptability, and the stubborn spark of life against overwhelming odds. For every second a human remains alive, they defy the orc's chaotic will. And yet, even this is no guarantee that they will live to tell the tale. Orc torture pits are not only arenas of physical torment, but also laboratories of psychological annihilation. In these spaces, the human mind is relentlessly assaulted in ways that conventional torture cannot replicate. Sensory overload is constant. The ceaseless roar of orc voices, the metallic clatter of machinery, the grotesque squeals of squigs, and the erratic flashes of light all blend into a disorienting, nightmarish symphony. Sleep is sporadic at best, often interrupted by the sudden appearance of orcs or their mech creations, and the body quickly succumbs to exhaustion, weakening the mind further. Fear becomes a permanent companion, gnawing at rational thought and corroding the very fabric of identity. Isolation or enforced proximity to other prisoners exacerbates the psychological strain. In some pits, humans are left alone, sometimes in complete darkness or in cramped, unsanitary cages, leading to hallucinations and profound loneliness. In others, prisoners are packed together in chaotic throngs, forced to witness the suffering of others, friends, strangers, or fellow conscripts, which amplifies the horror. Empathy, a cornerstone of human mental resilience, becomes a curse. Every scream, every tear, every futile struggle is a mirror reflecting one's own likely fate, a reminder that no one is safe, and that death may come at any moment. The unpredictability of orc cruelty is perhaps the most insidious psychological weapon. Unlike humans or even certain alien species, orcs do not adhere to patterns or schedules. A prisoner may be spared one day, only to face sudden, extreme punishment the next. A mechanized trap may be activated without warning, or a group of grots might experiment with a game that results in excruciating pain or even death. This unpredictability prevents the mind from finding stability. It ensures that prisoners cannot anticipate safety or prepare themselves mentally for challenges. Anxiety becomes permanent, fear an internalized rhythm that dictates every thought and movement. For humans who maintain some awareness of their own mortality, the sustained presence of death itself is a constant psychic burden. Every moment in the pit reinforces the inevitability of suffering. Fellow prisoners succumb to wounds, infection, or orc whims, leaving corpses as lessons for the living. The human mind, which clings to patterns and hope, is forced to adapt to a reality in which there is no logic, no justice, no expectation of tomorrow. This relentless confrontation with mortality can fracture sanity over time. Some prisoners may retreat inward, constructing elaborate fantasies or dissociative mental spaces to survive, while others may succumb to panic, aggression, or self-harm. The sensory and environmental manipulation in orc torture pits is designed, whether consciously or instinctively, to dismantle human cognition. In closed spaces, extreme heat or cold, foul odors, and constant tactile assaults, chains, spikes, or rough handling, are all combined with auditory and visual chaos to undermine concentration and memory. Prisoners struggle to maintain coherent thoughts, let alone strategize or coordinate resistance. Over time, memory itself begins to distort. Some captives may forget the passage of days or even months, losing track of personal history, which further weakens the sense of self. By the time any physical survival skills are exhausted, the mind may already be lost. Some prisoners attempt to develop coping mechanisms. They may avoid eye contact with orcs, mimic animal behavior, or engage in small acts of negotiation with grots, trying to secure slightly better treatment or avoid attention. But even these strategies are fraught with danger. Orcs interpret any display of cleverness or defiance as a challenge, and the punishment for being too smart can be swift and brutal. Thus, the mental balancing act required for survival is extraordinarily delicate. Prisoners must remain aware enough to protect themselves, yet appear weak or compliant enough to avoid attracting lethal interest. Social dynamics within the pit are equally perilous. Prisoners who align with grots or other subservient creatures may gain temporary allies, but trust is a fragile commodity. Grots themselves are capricious, often acting in ways that reflect orc humor rather than human logic. Cooperation with other prisoners is similarly fraught, as scarcity of food, water, and shelter may turn potential allies into competitors or threats. Survival often demands morally repugnant decisions, choosing whom to save, whom to deceive, or whether to act violently to ensure one's own continuation. The ethical erosion imposed by the environment can leave lasting psychological scars, even for those who escape. The psychological impact of orc torture pits also intersects with the human body's limitations. Constant stress hormones, malnutrition, and sleep deprivation compromise cognitive function, further impairing judgment and problem-solving abilities. Panic attacks, dissociation, and hallucinations become commonplace, exacerbating the challenges of survival. Even simple tasks, lifting debris, navigating the pit, or evading orc attention, become monumental challenges. Each day survived is not merely a testament to physical resilience, but a struggle against an internal, ever-escalating mental assault. A particularly insidious element is the manipulation of hope. Orcs, either instinctively or deliberately, provide fleeting moments of reprieve, a scrap of food, a seemingly dormant trap, or a temporary distraction, only to snatch them away at the height of expectation. This cruel play creates a cycle of anticipation and disappointment, further eroding morale. Humans are wired to cling to hope, yet in these pits, hope itself becomes a weapon, a lure into greater danger or despair, reinforcing the sense of helplessness. Finally, for the rare human who endures the pit for an extended period, the cumulative psychological damage is profound. Identity, sense of time, and personal history may be partially or completely lost. Survivors often emerge as fundamentally altered individuals. Cautious to the point of paranoia, emotionally blunted, and perpetually haunted by the trauma endured. Their survival is as much a product of psychological adaptation, numbing oneself, embracing cunning, or dissociating from reality, as it is of physical resilience. In essence, enduring an orc torture pit demands a radical reshaping of the mind, a transformation that ensures survival at the cost of the self as it once was. Orc pain boys and their crude medical expertise represent one of the most terrifying aspects of a torture pit. To a human, their work is unpredictable, grotesque, and horrifying, a chaotic blend of surgery, experimentation, and warped healing. Unlike Imperial Medicae, which follow strict protocols, pain boys operate with the philosophy that if it works, and their definition of working is entirely orcish. Limbs may be crudely reattached, organs manipulated, or cybernetic enhancements grafted in ways that often amplify pain rather than alleviate it. Survival here depends not just on enduring the physical agony, but on understanding that the act of repair can be as dangerous as the injury itself. The instruments of the pain boys are as alien as their methods. Scalpel blades forged from scrap metal, Powered drills salvaged from vehicles and bone saws driven by compressed steam or squig muscles are used without anesthesia. Patients are often strapped into twisting chairs, their limbs immobilized, while the pain boys laugh and joke, their humor inseparable from cruelty. They may deliberately induce shock to test thresholds or graft mechanical components into living flesh, creating hybrid monstrosities more effective as shock value than function. To a human, the experience is a nightmare, where the promise of survival is wrapped in a coil of unpredictable, excruciating procedures. Yet, pain boys are also oddly functional. Their methods, while chaotic, often succeed in keeping humans alive long enough to serve some purpose, whether as laborers, test subjects, or trophies. They patch wounds with bizarre mixtures of herbs, chemicals, and raw orc engineering, stabilizing the injured with crude but effective techniques. In a horrifying inversion of mercy, survival is sometimes granted not because of kindness, but because a living human is more valuable than a corpse. A tool for further experimentation, a subject for the next round of cruel amusement. In this sense, pain boys embody the orc paradox. The same hands that tear flesh apart may also keep it alive in service to violence. The psychological terror of being a patient of a pain boy is compounded by the sheer unpredictability of the procedures. One day, a human may survive a crude limb replacement. The next, a minor scrape could result in a near-fatal infection because a pain boy decided to improve the treatment. There's no consistency, no methodical care, and no understanding of human physiology. Every procedure is a gamble, and every day alive is as much a testament to chance as to endurance. For a human, this instability fosters constant tension, making it nearly impossible to find a rhythm or sense of security. Pain boys also experiment with augmentation in ways designed more for spectacle than survival. They may implant crude weapons, graft scavenge machinery onto flesh, or modify prisoners into grotesque cyborgs to serve as both laborers and intimidation displays for other captives. These enhancements are often lethal in and of themselves, causing immense pain, infection, or functional impairment. Yet paradoxically, they can extend life, at least in the short term, transforming the human body into something alien, resilient, and horrifyingly useful. To survive is to endure both the trauma of transformation and the trauma of daily torment. Even minor injuries in a torture pit can become catastrophic under the hands of a pain boy. A cut that would normally heal in days can be deliberately infected or grafted with crude prosthetics, creating a continuous cycle of pain and recovery. Infected wounds, missing limbs, and crude implants are all normalized. The human body is no longer a simple vessel. It is a canvas for chaos, an experiment in endurance, and a spectacle for orcish amusement. The pain boy's crude surgical techniques turn survival into a twisted dance. Stay alive long enough to be useful, but never long enough to reclaim normalcy. Yet, strangely, some prisoners do manage to adapt. They learn to anticipate pain boy whims, minimize reactions to prevent attention, and survive procedures that would break lesser individuals. Survival requires a deep, almost instinctual understanding of orc behavior, as well as an ironclad will to endure unbearable pain. Some may even feign death or feeble compliance to avoid further improvements. In essence, surviving a pain boy's ministrations is as much about psychological strategy as it is about physical fortitude. The human mind must calculate, deceive, and endure simultaneously, turning desperation into skill. The presence of pain boys also influences the social hierarchy within the pit. Prisoners who have been augmented or repaired, often against their will, may be perceived as more resilient or more valuable, attracting attention from both orcs and other prisoners. This can create a precarious balance. Enhanced individuals are sometimes spared immediate punishment, but become prime candidates for experimentation or dangerous labor. The line between advantage and doom is razor thin. Survival here is always conditional, fleeting, and precarious. Ultimately, pain boys epitomize the paradoxical cruelty of orc torture pits. They are destroyers and preservers, inflicting suffering while extending life, creating instruments of horror from the human body. To endure their work is to submit to chaos itself, to surrender to pain while clinging to the fragile thread of existence. Survival in the hands of a pain boy is never guaranteed, never clean, and never humane. It is a testament to the extreme adaptability of the human body and mind, a fragile flicker of life in a place designed to erase both. Even amidst the horror, whispers circulate among prisoners, tales of the rare, almost mythical humans who endure the torture pits. These are not stories of heroes, nor of miraculous escapes. They are dark legends born from the survival of the seemingly impossible. Some tell of guardsmen who hid in shadows for weeks, feeding off scraps, avoiding attention, and learning the rhythms of orc behavior. Others speak of prisoners who, through cunning, brutality, or sheer luck, managed to survive painboy experiments and return to the pit multiple times without succumbing. These stories are fragmentary, contradictory, and often exaggerated, but they reveal a terrifying truth. Survival is not purely a matter of strength. It is an intricate dance with chaos itself. The human imagination thrives on these rare sparks of hope. Captives cling to urban legends, tales of humans who tricked grots into supplying food, or who manipulated squigs into attacking orcs, buying themselves precious hours or days. Some stories involve prisoners who managed to camouflage themselves within the pit, hiding amidst debris, taking advantage of orc carelessness. Even when these legends are false, they serve a critical function. They keep the mind from snapping entirely. A prisoner's will to live often depends on believing survival is possible, even when every sensory input suggests otherwise. Yet, survival myths carry a bitter irony. Many survivors emerge irrevocably changed, physically, mentally, spiritually. Tales of prisoners who endured months often describe hollowed eyes, fractured identities, and behaviors alien to their former selves. Some develop coping mechanisms bordering on the monstrous, mimicry of orc speech and behavior, calculated cruelty toward other captives, or psychological dissociation from the horror around them. Survival comes at a cost, and in the torture pit, the cost is often the very essence of humanity. These stories underscore a haunting reality. Escaping death does not mean reclaiming life. In-universe, some of these survivors are whispered about as cautionary examples. Soldiers talk in hushed tones about the hollow ones, humans who returned from orc captivity but were forever transformed. Their bodies bear grafts from painboy interventions. Their minds are fractured by months of sensory overload, trauma, and despair. Some can no longer tolerate light, sound, or social contact. Others become obsessive, fixated on minute details, replaying the horrors endlessly. For the Imperium, these individuals are at once living evidence of resilience and a grim reminder of the price exacted by the orcs. Chaos. Fan theories often expand these survival stories, proposing that a select few captives develop unique adaptations that allow them to navigate orc madness. Some suggest heightened situational awareness, the ability to predict orc whims and avoid attention. Others propose psychological plasticity, where prisoners can endure prolonged terror without the typical breakdown of cognition. In this light, the mythic survivors are almost a new subspecies. Humans molded by trauma into something different, not entirely broken, but fundamentally altered to exist within the pit's ecosystem. These theories offer both hope and horror. Survival is possible, but the cost is extreme and permanent. The orcs themselves may unintentionally contribute to these survival stories. Their chaotic routines, inconsistent attention, and bizarre cultural quirks occasionally allow prisoners to exploit gaps in the system. Grots, squigs, and even inattentive knobs may create small windows of opportunity for the cunning. Yet these windows are fleeting, and any miscalculation can result in instant death. The environment is always in flux, forcing survivors to constantly adapt. Luck is as essential as skill. A single misstep can undo weeks of careful planning and endurance. In this sense, survival is a stochastic achievement, as much about chance as it is about human tenacity. Some prisoner myths describe the use of alliances, fragile pacts with other captives or lower orcs. These alliances are often pragmatic and temporary, forged out of necessity rather than trust. Grots may provide hidden morsels of food, warn of impending danger, or manipulate squigs on the prisoner's behalf. Fellow humans may share knowledge of trap patterns or offer brief moments of physical assistance. Yet, betrayal is common, whether driven by fear, scarcity, or orcish manipulation. In the pit, cooperation is a fragile, dangerous experiment in human social strategy. It may sustain life temporarily, but it rarely ensures long-term safety. The physical adaptations of survivors are another facet of these legends. Some endure repeated painboy enhancements, incorporating crude implants or mechanical grafts into their bodies. These augmentations often improve resilience, turning survivors into grotesque hybrids of human and machine. Yet even these adaptations carry consequences. Pain is magnified, mobility impaired, and identity further eroded. The human body becomes both a shield and a curse, extending life while exacting psychological and emotional tolls. In this light, survival is not simply endurance, it is transformation under duress, a reshaping of flesh and psyche by the demands of orc cruelty. The rarity of such survivors reinforces the horror of the torture pit. Out of hundreds, perhaps only a handful live long enough to be remembered, and even fewer retain any semblance of their former selves. The Imperium treats these individuals with a mixture of reverence and dread. They are evidence of human resilience, yet reminders of the extreme, transformative horrors orcs can inflict. Among the captives still within the pit, these myths serve as a double-edged sword. A beacon of hope, yes, but also a warning that survival comes at an almost unthinkable cost. Ultimately, these whispered stories, whether fact, exaggeration, or legend, highlight the essential truth of the orc torture pits. Survival is not just a physical act, it is a narrative of cunning, adaptability, psychological endurance, and sometimes pure luck. The myths persist because humans are storytellers, desperate to find meaning in an otherwise meaningless horror. They endure not just for their lives, but for the possibility of proving that, even in a place designed for annihilation, the spark of humanity can survive, though perhaps forever changed, hollowed, and haunted by the horrors it has endured. The warp itself seems to bleed into the torture pits, not in the overtly demonic way a chaos cult might experience it, but subtly, insidiously, twisting perception and amplifying fear. Orcs, though not psychers in the human sense, are innately attuned to the psychic energies around them. The WAP functions almost like a collective psychic resonance. This psychic hum seeps into the environment, especially in dense, enclosed spaces like a torture pit, where orc presence, violence, and excitement are concentrated. For a human prisoner, this manifests as persistent unease, hallucinations, and sometimes a creeping sense of disconnection from reality. The warp amplifies the terror already present, turning routine brutality into something almost supernatural. Weird Boys, the psyker caste of orcs, are particularly dangerous in this context. Their powers are erratic, raw, and destructive, and they feed directly off the emotions of those around them. A human caught in proximity can experience sudden psychic shocks, intense pain, disorientation, or hallucinations that feel real. Entire sections of a pit may collapse under a Weird Boy's unconscious manipulation of the WAC energy, crushing prisoners or activating traps. The unpredictability of psychic influence in such a volatile environment adds another layer of terror, as no strategy can reliably account for sudden supernatural forces. In essence, the warp, through orcish psyker activity, ensures that a human's mind and body are never at rest, never fully in control. Even for humans not actively near a Weird Boy, the ambient psychic residue of the pit is corrosive. Fear is amplified, past trauma resurfaces vividly, and the sense of time becomes warped. Minutes may stretch into hours, hours into what feels like days, as every movement and sound is interpreted as threat. Some captives report feeling watched not just by orcs, but by a presence behind the veil of reality itself, a creeping awareness that their suffering resonates beyond the physical realm. In these moments, the torture pit is not only a site of corporal torment, but also a crucible for psychic pressure, designed, intentionally or not, to push minds to their breaking points. Survivors' coping mechanisms against these psychic intrusions are often subtle and instinctive. Some learn to focus intensely on mundane tasks, eating, hiding, or moving debris, as a way to anchor themselves in reality. Others employ mental compartmentalization, segmenting experiences to reduce the cognitive load of horror. Some enter a trance-like state, almost dissociative, allowing their bodies to survive while the mind temporarily withdraws. Yet, even these strategies are temporary bulwarks. The persistent, chaotic psychic influence of the orcs ensures that no human can fully acclimate, and even minor lapses in attention can result in sudden pain, injury, or death. The warp-tainted environment also interacts with faith. Prisoners who cling to belief in the Emperor may find fleeting solace or internal strength, using prayer or ritual to maintain identity amidst madness. However, these moments are fragile. The psychic turbulence of the pit and the overwhelming presence of alien, violent energies often makes spiritual focus nearly impossible. Faith may sustain a prisoner temporarily, but prolonged exposure risks shattering the mind entirely, leaving a hollow, fearful shell. In this sense, religion is both a potential refuge and a source of vulnerability, a reminder of what is lost and what could be destroyed by sustained trauma. Weird boy-induced phenomena are unpredictable even in scale. Small shocks may immobilize a prisoner for moments, while larger surges can obliterate entire sections of the pit or trigger violent reactions from nearby orcs and creatures. The human brain struggles to parse these events rationally. Every sudden occurrence is potentially lethal. Every noise or vibration could signal psychic activity. Over time, heightened awareness becomes instinctual, a survival adaptation, but it also results in hypervigilance, insomnia, and chronic stress. The mind is trained to survive danger, but the constant, omnipresent threat is exhausting beyond measure. Moreover, the orc psyche itself feeds into the warp. Their instinctive joy in conflict and suffering amplifies psychic resonance. Every bellow, every fight, every act of destruction strengthens the ambient psychic field. For a human, this means that the torture pit is not merely a physical space, but a dynamic psychic ecosystem, constantly interacting with perception and emotion. Sensory input, emotional response, and instinctive reaction are all modulated by forces beyond understanding, making basic survival an almost metaphysical challenge. For the rare human who endures, the warp leaves indelible marks. Even after escape or release, many report persistent nightmares, hallucinations, and heightened sensitivity to emotional or psychic energy. Some develop unusual intuitions or premonitions, traits that may or may not be advantageous in the larger galaxy. Others are haunted by visions and voices that make reintegration nearly impossible. Survival is not a return to normality, but a transformation into someone who carries the psychic imprint of the pit indefinitely. In sum, the warp and the weird boy presence transform the torture pit from a brutal physical environment into a fully immersive psychic battlefield. Humans trapped within are assailed not only by orcish cruelty, but by forces that destabilize perception, warp reality, and press relentlessly against sanity itself. To survive requires mental resilience, instinct, and perhaps luck. But even then, the mind is forever altered, forever scarred by the psychic horror intertwined with the pit's physical torment. Amidst the chaos and psychic torment, some prisoners find themselves forming tenuous alliances with the lowest tier of orc society, grots and snotlings. While these creatures are often as dangerous as they are diminutive, their role in the torture pits is multifaceted. Part laborer, part tormentor, part unpredictable accomplice. For a human, grots may represent the only potential glimmer of aid in an otherwise lethal environment. They are nimble, small enough to navigate spaces humans cannot, and often underestimated by their orc masters. Observing or manipulating grots can be a lifeline, a source of stolen food, information about traps, or even distraction from the more violent orcs. The interactions between humans and grots are fraught with tension and danger. Grots are mischievous, cruel, and unpredictable, delighting in torment just as much as their larger kin. Yet they are also capable of pragmatic thinking. A human who can anticipate grots' actions, bribe them with scraps, or exploit their fears may gain temporary survival advantages. These alliances are never safe, never permanent, but they provide small windows of respite, moments in which the human can recover, strategize, or simply survive the immediate threat. In a torture pit, such fragile bonds may tip the balance between life and death. Snotlings, smaller still and often even more chaotic than grots, are another variable in survival strategy. Their unpredictability is both a hazard and a potential advantage. A prisoner might hide among a swarm of snotlings during an inspection, or use their rapid, erratic movements to distract orcs long enough to escape punishment. However, snotlings' loyalty is non-existent. They respond only to immediate incentives or instinctual behavior. Trusting them is a calculated risk. Sometimes they attack humans as readily as they attack each other. Yet for a clever prisoner, understanding these small creatures' instincts can create leverage in a place otherwise devoid of mercy. The presence of these low-tier orcs also introduces an element of psychological complexity. Humans in the pits quickly learn that absolute defiance is suicide, but cautious observation and selective interaction may yield unexpected benefits. These microstrategies, though minor in the grand scheme, are essential to prolonged survival. A grot's warning of an approaching knob, a snotling inadvertently triggering a trap on behalf of a human, or even the simple act of sharing small amounts of stolen food, each action, though small, compounds into a fragile buffer against immediate death. In a way, survival becomes an exercise in social cunning as much as physical endurance. Interestingly, these alliances may also provide psychological reprieve. Even brief moments of interaction that are not dominated by pain or fear allow prisoners to retain fragments of humanity. Speaking, gesturing, or negotiating with grots and snotlings, creatures that are alien but not overtly malicious in every interaction, gives the human mind something to anchor itself to amid relentless horror. These micro-interactions, tiny acts of agency, help preserve mental resilience. For some, these connections may form the slender thread on which sanity hangs. Yet, dependence on grots and snotlings is double-edged. While they can provide protection or aid, they are also vectors of danger, capable of alerting orcs, misdirecting prisoners, or engaging in violent acts that imperil humans. Survival requires constant calculation: when to interact, when to hide, and when to act. Every choice carries immediate consequences. One mistake, one misjudged action, can nullify days or weeks of careful endurance. In this sense, life in the pit is a continuous negotiation, a delicate balance of risk, timing, and observation. Ultimately, the lowliest orcs play a surprising role in the human struggle to survive. While they are part of the system designed to oppress and torment, they also introduce variables that can be exploited, granting prisoners fleeting opportunities to persist. Humans who understand these dynamics, who can read the impulses, habits, and weaknesses of grots and snotlings, gain a marginal but crucial edge. In a world where raw strength and fortitude are often insufficient, intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to navigate this complex social microcosm become essential tools for survival. For those trapped in orc torture pits, such alliances may be the difference between life, death, and a slow, hollow existence at the edge of madness. Prolonged exposure to the orc pit often transforms the human beyond recognition, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. The constant violence, deprivation, and psychological strain act as a crucible, reshaping the mind into something that can endure the unbearable. Some prisoners slowly shed what they consider distinctly human traits: hesitation, empathy, moral concern, or even hope. Survival demands a ruthless pragmatism that erodes former identity. They learn to act with the cold efficiency of instinct, responding to danger not with fear or thought, but with reflex, calculation, and sometimes cruelty, essentially becoming a mirror of the chaotic environment around them. Physically, humans may also undergo grotesque transformations. Painboy enhancements, repeated injuries, and the strain of forced labor alter the body. Limbs may be missing, twisted, or reinforced with crude mechanical devices. Skin may be scarred from burns, cuts, and surgical grafts. The body becomes a survival tool first and a vessel of humanity second. Some survivors may even adapt in ways that confer advantages: heightened strength or reflexes born from constant threat, endurance bolstered by trauma, and a capacity for pain that far exceeds ordinary limits. Yet these adaptations come at the cost of suffering, deformity, and alienation from former self. Psychologically, the transformation is equally profound. The mind constructs coping mechanisms to endure the relentless stress: dissociation, compartmentalization of trauma, hypervigilance, or the adoption of orc-like behavior patterns. Prisoners may mimic orc aggression to avoid punishment, internalize chaos to anticipate violence, or suppress empathy to survive alongside constant suffering. Each mechanism is a double-edged sword, enabling life while eroding what made the individual human. Over time, the prisoner may find their own thoughts, desires, and values replaced by calculated survival instincts and adaptations that blur the line between victim and participant in the orc's sadistic theater. Some prisoners even undergo social transformation, embracing alliances or hierarchies imposed by their environment. They may dominate weaker captives, negotiate with grots, or manipulate small orc contingents, adopting social behaviors alien to their former selves. These adaptations, while strategic, further distance the individual from pre-capture morality and identity. Survival becomes synonymous with transformation. To endure is to change, often in ways that cannot be undone once the individual leaves the pit. Time itself amplifies these transformations. Months in the pit stretch perception and memory. Days bleed into weeks, weeks into months, and the human's grasp on linear experience weakens. Survivors may lose track of their former lives, names, or even basic human norms. In essence, the torture pit functions not only as a physical and psychological gauntlet, but as a cultural and existential crucible. Those who survive emerge not as the humans who entered, but as creatures forged by sustained horror, social cunning, and environmental pressure. The process is not uniform. Each prisoner adapts differently, depending on innate resilience, intelligence, physical capacity, and sheer luck. Some may retain fragments of their former humanity, a sense of morality, hope, or self-identity, but these remnants are fragile and often subordinated to survival imperatives. Others lose nearly all connection to who they were, functioning solely as adaptive entities within the orcs' ecosystem. The torture pit thus acts as a selective mechanism, preserving those capable of extreme adaptation while erasing those who cannot conform. Ultimately, the torture pit illustrates the brutal calculus of survival in a galaxy dominated by alien logic. Humans are neither strong enough to dominate nor weak enough to be destroyed immediately. Instead, they are tested, broken, and sometimes remade. The experience challenges the very definition of humanity, demonstrating that endurance often requires a transformation that, while preserving life, compromises identity. In this way, the orcs, through their unpredictable cruelty, environment, and social chaos, create survivors who are fundamentally altered, both physically and psychologically, a testament to the adaptive potential of humans under extreme, unrelenting stress. Within the orc hierarchy, some humans are not merely prisoners, but become quasi-pets, mascots, or owned entities, a concept alien to imperial norms. This ownership is neither benevolent nor protective. It is a perverse blend of status, amusement, and utility. A human in this position may be kept alive because their suffering is entertaining, because they perform tasks that amuse or assist orcs, or simply because they serve as a trophy demonstrating the warband's dominance. The orcs themselves do not perceive cruelty as morally wrong. To them, keeping a human as a plaything is just another form of utility, an extension of their instinctual desire for chaos and fun. These pets often exist at the interface between torment and privilege. They are fed, sheltered, or protected from the most immediate dangers of the pit, but only insofar as these measures increase their value or entertainment potential. A human who has gained this dubious status may be spared the most extreme forms of daily punishment, yet remain subject to constant surveillance and manipulation. Even minor mistakes can provoke immediate, brutal consequences, reinforcing a strict, albeit alien, hierarchy. Life here is not freedom. It is a controlled performance under the scrutiny of beings for whom suffering is spectacle. The psychological toll of being a human pet is profound. These captives occupy a strange space where they are simultaneously more visible and more vulnerable than other prisoners. They may witness horrors that others can ignore or endure at a distance, forced to participate in orc rituals, witness brutal competitions, or act as entertainers during fights. Their sense of autonomy is minimal. Survival depends not only on physical endurance, but on mastering the social and cultural cues of their captors. Understanding when to show submission, when to feign obedience, and when to act subtly can mean the difference between prolonged life and instant death. Physical survival in this position can also involve paradoxical adaptation. Painboy enhancements or selective protection may allow these humans to endure extreme trauma while simultaneously increasing visibility and exposure. They are often used in experiments, forced into combat, or subjected to public humiliation as part of their role. Their bodies may bear scars, implants, or modifications that mark them both as victims and as prized possessions. In some ways, their altered physiology can prolong survival, but at the cost of autonomy, comfort, and identity. Social dynamics among prisoners are also distorted by the existence of these pets. Other captives may resent, envy, or fear individuals in this position, creating tension and potential conflict. Alliances can shift rapidly as survival instincts compete with limited resources and fragile trust networks. The pet status may offer temporary protection, but it is always contingent on orc whims. One moment of defiance or perceived boredom could reverse the power dynamic instantly, turning the individual from protected to expendable. For the human mind, navigating this environment is a constant psychological balancing act. Maintaining a facade of compliance, entertaining captors without provoking them, and managing relationships with other prisoners requires constant calculation. These efforts drain mental energy and erode prior sense of self. Yet paradoxically, the skills developed in this environment, observation, deception, negotiation under extreme stress, can increase the likelihood of survival. Life as a human pet is thus simultaneously a crucible and a laboratory. Every day is a test of cunning, endurance, and psychological flexibility. Despite the potential for minor protections, this status does not equate to genuine safety. The orc's concept of ownership is fluid, responsive to immediate amusement or practical needs. A human may be cherished for weeks, only to be repurposed for sacrifice, combat, or experimentation without warning. Survival demands constant vigilance and adaptability. The line between favored and doomed is razor thin. In the end, being owned may extend life temporarily, but it reinforces the fact that every moment exists under the shadow of unpredictable, orcish cruelty. Speculating on how a space marine might fare in an orc torture pit adds a fascinating dimension to the discussion. Superhuman strength, reinforced armor, accelerated healing, and psychic resistance seem at first glance like a perfect buffer against orc cruelty. A typical human might be crushed, burned, or hacked apart within days, but a space marine could survive injuries that would obliterate entire squads of regular soldiers. Their enhanced physiology allows them to endure starvation, pain, and trauma far beyond mortal limits, while their armor offers protection against the random brutality of machinery, traps, and smaller orcs. In theory, a space marine should be a formidable survivor in even the most chaotic environments. However, survival is not solely a question of physical resilience. The orc's ingenuity in creating chaos is as psychological as it is physical. Their unpredictability, combined with the constant sensory assault, can undermine even a disciplined mind. While a space marine's training emphasizes discipline and focus, the environment of a torture pit, relentless sound, smell, and the ever-present threat of sudden, absurd violence is designed to break perception itself. Mental fatigue may be slower to take hold, but the endless randomness of danger, the cruelty inflicted for entertainment, and the warp-tinged psychic environment imposed by weird boys could wear down even a mind honed for centuries of warfare. Painboy interventions complicate matters further. While a normal human might be destroyed by crude cybernetic grafts or mechanical enhancements, a space marine's physiology can tolerate radical modifications. Orcs might inadvertently create a hybrid of flesh and machine within the marine, perhaps enhancing certain capabilities while imposing grotesque deformities or constant pain. Even with superior endurance, the sheer absurdity and randomness of these augmentations, combined with exposure to orc-derived psychic phenomena, could test the limits of a space marine's resilience. Pain, injury, and grotesque transformation could become a continuous psychological trial rather than an immediate fatality. The social environment would also challenge a space marine. While orcs might recognize strength and aggression, and thus hesitate to attack outright, they are also chaotic and unpredictable. A marine attempting to assert dominance might trigger attacks from multiple angles, or provoke a warband into testing his endurance in novel ways. Furthermore, alliances with grots or interactions with snotlings which help human prisoners survive might be less effective. These creatures may view a towering space marine as a threat or a curiosity, responding erratically rather than predictably. Survival in this context becomes a test of not just brute strength, but of situational awareness and adaptability under extreme stress. The warp's subtle influence in the pit could pose another insidious threat. While space marines are generally resistant to psychic corruption and manipulation, the concentrated psychic resonance of a wag combined with the environmental chaos, might induce disorientation, hallucination, or stress that exceeds the normal bounds of endurance. Even the genetically enhanced mind of a Marine could struggle against sustained, unpredictable psychic intrusion, especially when coupled with the sensory assault of the pit. Maintaining clarity and tactical thought becomes a continuous challenge, with lapses potentially as deadly as physical wounds. Yet in pure survivability terms, a Space Marine is far more likely to endure than a regular human. Their enhanced physiology, strength, and healing would allow them to withstand prolonged torture, brute force, and environmental hazards. They could potentially escape traps, resist injuries, and endure deprivation that would destroy ordinary prisoners. Still, survival comes at a cost. The mental and emotional strain, exposure to grotesque modifications, and forced adaptation to Orc chaos would likely leave even a Marine altered, scarred physically, traumatized psychologically, and potentially alienated from the discipline and order of the chapter's norms. In essence, while a Space Marine might survive an Orc torture pit far longer than any human, survival is not synonymous with triumph. Strength and endurance grant longevity, but the unpredictable brutality, psychological assaults, and warp-tainted environment ensure that life in the pit is an unending trial. Even a superhuman could emerge from such an ordeal transformed, carrying physical scars, the mental strain, and perhaps a degree of alienation from the universe he once knew. It is a survival defined not by death avoided, but by the capacity to endure the unimaginable, and endure it without surrendering one's core sense of self entirely. Even the most devout human faith can be tested, and often broken, within the confines of an Orc torture pit. The Emperor's light, the guiding presence of the God Emperor of mankind, may offer fleeting comfort to the imprisoned, a mental anchor against the unrelenting chaos surrounding them. Prayer, meditation, or ritual can serve as a fragile psychological shield, allowing the mind to maintain a thread of hope, identity, and purpose. In moments of extreme suffering, belief can bolster courage, reduce panic, and provide a framework through which to interpret the meaningless violence. For some, the Emperor is the last sanctuary, a presence that reminds them of their humanity when the Orcs are attempting to erase it entirely. Yet the warp-tainted energies present in the pit challenge even the strongest faith. The psychic resonance of the Wog, the unpredictable powers of Weird Boys, and the ambient cruelty of Orc revelry all conspire to distort perception, amplify fear, and create illusions that can make devotion feel fragile or futile. Humans may see visions of failure, hear whispers of despair, or experience moments where the very laws of reality appear to bend. In such a context, faith is no longer a guarantee of resilience. It becomes a delicate instrument, subject to psychic interference and sensory assault. The mind must continuously reconcile hope with the horrors that constantly threaten it. Isolation and sensory deprivation further strain spiritual endurance. When chained, starved, or left in darkness, humans may struggle to maintain coherent thought or recall sacred teachings. The relentless environment of the pit attacks memory, identity, and belief in subtle ways. Time loses meaning, suffering becomes perpetual, and the self becomes a fragmentary concept. For many, the Emperor is not an external protector but an internalized guide, a mental construct sustaining morale. Yet under prolonged psychic pressure and chaos, even this internal anchor can fray. The longer a prisoner remains, the more tenuous their grasp on faith becomes, potentially leading to despair or mental collapse. Interestingly, faith can also be weaponized by the Orcs, intentionally or inadvertently. Orc rituals, perverse mockeries of combat, or displays of captive suffering can appear as blasphemous spectacles to the human mind. Painboy experiments, forced mutilation, and degradation in front of others may mock sacred concepts, creating cognitive dissonance that undermines devotion. The prisoner is forced to reconcile the divine with the grotesque, and the constant tension can erode spiritual resilience, even as the body continues to survive. In some cases, religious practice becomes a coping mechanism. In others, a trigger for despair, a paradox central to the human experience in the pit. For the rare prisoner able to maintain faith, the Emperor's guidance may offer insight into Orc behavior or environmental awareness, helping to anticipate danger or resist despair. Prayer and meditation can sharpen focus, enhance memory, and sustained determination, allowing subtle advantages in navigation, concealment, or exploitation of grots and snotlings. Faith may even allow the mind to endure what the body cannot, sustaining hope when physical strength fails. Yet this is not guaranteed. Even the most devout can falter under sustained psychic interference or prolonged trauma, as the pit systematically erodes certainty, perception, and confidence. Ultimately, spiritual endurance in an orc torture pit is a precarious balance. Faith may provide mental fortitude, a sense of identity, and hope, but it also exposes prisoners to new vulnerabilities. Despair when prayers go unanswered, disillusionment when divine justice seems absent, and confusion when reality itself warps under warp-tinged energies. The human mind, even when guided by the Emperor, is tested as rigorously as the body. Survival requires a synergy of physical resilience, psychological adaptation, and spiritual endurance. The cost of this balance is high. Even those who endure may emerge irrevocably altered, their faith tested, their perception of the universe irrevocably shifted, carrying the psychic scars of a crucible that respects neither belief nor flesh. In this way, the orc torture pit is more than a physical prison. It is a trial of body, mind, and soul, where the strength of belief can sustain life or crumble under relentless pressure. To survive is not merely to endure pain, it is to navigate chaos, resist psychic and moral assault, and cling to identity amidst forces designed to erase it. Here, faith is both a lifeline and a battlefield, shaping the human experience as profoundly as hunger, injury, or fear. In the orc torture pit, time becomes meaningless. Days, weeks, and months blur into an unending cycle of agony, deprivation, and terror. Sensory input is constant. The smell of rot, the screech of squigs, the hammering of machinery, and the ceaseless roar of orc laughter combine into a relentless assault on both body and mind. Prisoners come to perceive life in increments of survival. The time it takes to scavenge a morsel of food, the seconds needed to evade a nob's attention, the heartbeat between screams. Human concepts of hours or days cease to apply. Existence is measured in pain, endurance, and fleeting moments of reprieve. As the body weakens, the mind begins to fracture. Starvation, sleep deprivation, and injury reduce cognitive capacity, making concentration, memory, and rational thought increasingly difficult. Prisoners may experience hallucinations, seeing figures where none exist, hearing whispers of warning or mockery, or feeling phantom touches. The relentless stress amplifies these experiences. Even those who enter the pit with strong mental fortitude find their thoughts looping uncontrollably, replaying horrors, or inventing scenarios to explain chaos. Memory itself may distort, leaving individuals unsure of how long they have been trapped or what is real. In such an environment, sanity becomes a fragile construct. Social dynamics among prisoners compound this strain. Alliances, when they exist, are temporary and fraught with danger. Humans may collaborate to steal food, evade orcs, or manipulate grots and snotlings. But scarcity and fear foster betrayal. Trust is tenuous, and survival may require morally reprehensible choices. Acts of compassion can be punished, while cunning and opportunism may prolong life. In this way, the pit imposes not only physical hardship but ethical erosion, forcing prisoners to reconcile survival with decisions that conflict with prior moral frameworks. Physical suffering remains constant. The combination of forced labor, exposure to environmental hazards, and random attacks by orcs or their creations keeps the body in a near-perpetual state of trauma. Cuts and abrasions fester, untreated injuries worsen, and repeated punishment amplifies existing wounds. The pain is compounded by the unpredictability of orc behavior. A knob may strike without warning, a trap may activate for amusement, or a pain boy might experiment, merging flesh with crude machinery. In this environment, no injury is minor, no respite guaranteed, and no recovery straightforward. The warp and weird boy influence further destabilize prisoners. Erratic psychic energy can induce disorientation, hallucinations, or sudden pain, compounding physical and mental strain. The ambient whack resonance affects perception, making even ordinary tasks hazardous. Survival requires constant attention, anticipation, and adaptation, but no strategy can fully account for the random interference of psychic forces. Over time, hypervigilance becomes a mental reflex. Prisoners expend enormous cognitive energy simply staying aware, yet even this may not prevent death or injury. Adaptation is key. Survivors develop micro-strategies, observing orc routines, exploiting grots, hiding from weird boy surges, and rationing food. They may feign weakness, imitate orc behavior, or mentally detach from pain to function. These adaptations are crucial for enduring weeks or months in a pit where ordinary humans would perish in days. Survival is a continuous negotiation between environment, captors, and self, a complex interplay of instinct, cunning, and endurance. Survival in an orc torture pit is rarely a matter of mere endurance. It often requires a profound transformation of body and mind. Humans trapped for extended periods frequently find themselves altered in ways both grotesque and adaptive. Physical changes result not only from repeated injuries and forced labor, but also from pain boy interventions, crude augmentations, and environmental stressors. Limbs may be grafted with crude mechanical devices, muscles hardened from constant strain, and skin scarred from burns or chemical exposure. Each modification, while painful or disfiguring, can confer a marginal survival advantage, reinforcing the grim calculus of adaptation in the pit. Survival is thus inseparable from transformation. The body becomes both a shield and a burden, extending life while marking the prisoner as fundamentally changed. Psychological metamorphosis is equally profound. Constant exposure to chaos, violence, and deprivation rewires thought patterns. Many prisoners develop hypervigilance, dissociation, or compartmentalization as coping mechanisms. These adaptations allow them to endure pain, navigate traps, and anticipate orc behavior, yet erode prior identity and moral frameworks. Empathy may fade, fear responses become reflexive, and strategic calculation overrides instinctive human responses. The mind, like the body, reshapes itself to fit the demands of the environment. Survival becomes a function of adaptation rather than principle. Over time, the prisoner may no longer operate as a human in the conventional sense, but as a hybrid entity molded by necessity and torment. Social adaptations also emerge. Prisoners learn to exploit alliances with other captives, grots, or even snotlings, using negotiation, deception, or intimidation to gain advantages. These social strategies are precarious, subject to betrayal, and must be balanced against constant surveillance by orcs. Humans may manipulate, mimic, or outwit weaker creatures to create fleeting opportunities for survival. Such behaviors are essential, yet further alienate the prisoner from their prior humanity. Embedding cunning and pragmatism as survival imperatives, adaptation becomes multidimensional. Physical, psychological, and social integration into the chaotic ecosystem of the pit. The warp-infused environment imposes additional stressors. Psychic interference from weird boys and the ambient wak resonance amplifies fear, distorts perception, and can induce hallucinations or disorientation. Even the most disciplined minds may struggle to interpret reality accurately, complicating decision-making and reaction times. Survival requires the prisoner to navigate both tangible threats and intangible psychic influences. In some cases, repeated exposure may foster unusual cognitive adaptations. Heightened situational awareness, intuitive anticipation of orc behavior, or resistance to minor psychic disruption. Yet these adaptations are double-edged, providing survival advantages while further reshaping the prisoner's mind. Faith, when present, can temporarily bolster resilience, but even spiritual endurance is tested to extremes. Belief in the Emperor may provide mental structure and purpose, but repeated exposure to horror, psychic intrusion, and orcish mockery erodes certainty. Prayer and meditation can help sustain focus, but persistent trauma may weaken conviction, leaving survivors spiritually hollow or fractured. Survival, therefore, is not merely a physical or cognitive challenge, but an existential trial in which body, mind, and soul are continuously pressed to their limits. By the time a human becomes accustomed, if such a word even applies, to the rhythms of an orc torture pit, the concept of identity itself is in flux. Survival demands a continual negotiation between instinct, observation, and deception. Every movement, glance, and breath must be calculated against the whims of orcs, the erratic behavior of grots, and the unpredictable interference of psychic energy. Even minor mistakes can result in immediate, brutal consequences. Over time, the prisoner begins to internalize the chaos, developing a kind of intuitive understanding of orc behavior and pit dynamics. This adaptation is less conscious learning than a profound recalibration of perception and reaction, a human becoming a creature shaped by extreme adversity. Physical resilience becomes an intertwined product of biology and adaptation. Chronic injuries, infections, and forced augmentations impose ongoing strain on the body, but the human organism is remarkably plastic. Muscles stiffen in anticipation of physical threat, reflexes sharpen, and endurance grows under constant duress. Pain thresholds increase, allowing for continued functionality even under extreme conditions. Yet each adaptation carries a cost. Scarring, disfigurement, and systemic strain accumulate, leaving survivors both strengthened and visibly marked by their environment. In the pit, the body becomes a tool honed for survival, reshaped to endure what normal humans could not imagine. The mind, however, is the most profoundly altered. Sensory overload, isolation, and sustained trauma induce changes in perception and cognition. Prisoners may experience dissociation, compartmentalization of fear, or hyperfocus on immediate survival tasks. Memory becomes fragmented, temporal awareness distorts, emotional regulation is reshaped to prioritize life over empathy or morality. Cognitive strategies once trivial, such as deception, mimicry, and careful observation, evolve into essential survival instincts. In effect, the prisoner's mental architecture is reorganized to maximize resilience in an environment designed for annihilation. Interaction with other captives, grots, and snotlings further refines these adaptive behaviors. Social intelligence becomes a vital survival skill. The human must read subtle cues, anticipate erratic actions, and manipulate interactions to secure even minimal advantages. Cooperation is fragile and contingent, fraught with the potential for betrayal or lethal miscalculation. These microstrategies, often improvisational, highlight that survival is not purely physical. It is an ongoing negotiation with environment, captors, and fellow beings, requiring constant vigilance and flexibility. Exposure to the warp and weird boy influence compounds the challenge. Psychic disturbances distort reality, alter perception, and intensify fear. The prisoner's adaptive strategies must extend to anticipating or mitigating sudden psychic events, unpredictable surges that can kill, disorient, or drive humans to madness. Mental endurance thus incorporates an element of intuitive psychic navigation, a constant awareness that reality is mutable, danger is omnipresent, and survival depends on rapid, flexible responses. Even space marines, genetically enhanced and trained, would find these conditions mentally taxing over prolonged periods. Spiritual endurance plays a nuanced role. Faith in the Emperor or other guiding principles can provide psychological structure and fleeting solace, offering a mental anchor amidst chaos. Yet, these anchors are fragile, constantly tested by the pit's horrors and the unpredictable influences of psychic resonance. Spiritual practice may sustain hope, improve focus, and enhance mental clarity, but prolonged exposure risks eroding belief, leaving survivors spiritually fragmented, in addition to physically and psychologically altered. In sum, survival in an orc torture pit is possible, but it is neither complete nor humane. Those who endure do so at tremendous cost. Bodies are scarred and augmented, minds reshaped and hardened, and souls stretched to the limit of endurance. Life becomes a function of adaptability, cunning, and relentless observation, rather than strength or virtue. The pit is not merely a physical challenge, but a crucible that tests every aspect of humanity, forcing those who survive to evolve into something fundamentally different. Creatures capable of enduring the unendurable. If you've been captivated by the horrifying ingenuity of orc torture pits and want to explore more tales of survival, transformation, and the darkest corners of the 41st millennium, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We delve deep into the brutality, the heroism, and the twisted ingenuity of the Warhammer 40k universe, giving you stories and analysis that you won't find anywhere else. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we continue to uncover the nightmares and legends lurking in the grim darkness of the far future.